In this video, I want to talk about the night that Chris Watts murdered his family and the morning after. But first of all, why did Chris Watts murder his family? What was his motive? A narcissist needs to be the centre of someone's world. You know, they need to be completely needed and adored by someone, or at least completely affected by them. And when he first met Shanann, she was very sick and she was very vulnerable. But things changed for her and she started to do really well with her business and to get a lot of new friends. And her not needing him nearly so much and not being so codependent on him would have been quite insulting to Chris, because it would have meant that he was no longer everything to her. And it would have been quite different with Nicole Kessinger, because she was just starting to fall in love with him. And so he would have meant a lot to her. All of her focus would have been on him. And this is why at the beginning of a relationship, a narcissist heaps on loads of compliments and puts someone on a pedestal, partly because they're so excited to be the full focus of that person. Narcissistic supply is something a narcissist relies on to get through everyday life. It's a sort of fuel that they need. Because they can't feel love, and because when they're loved, it's not really them that's being loved, it's their mask, because nobody really knows who they are, it means that they need to get the next best thing, and that is like a big ego boost. When somebody reacts to a narcissist emotionally, it can be a negative reaction, it can be upset or fear, or it can be a positive one where they adore the narcissist. But either way, it gives the narcissist a feeling of power because they've managed to get somebody to feel something strong because of them. And and that makes them feel really powerful and like they matter. And feeling like they matter and that they're important is the next best thing to feeling loved. If he had left Shanann and shared custody of the children, he wouldn't have had Nicole Kessinger's full attention. Here's what she says in the police interview about it.
Like, he could pretty much call me whenever he wanted. Like, I was the one that would tell him, like, hey, when your kids are awake, you need to spend time with your kids. Like, do that. And then after they go to bed, like, if you want to talk to me, you can talk to me. Like, sometimes, like, right after work, if I was, like, still talking to him, I'd get kind of bummed out. And I'd tell him, just like, oh, it's frustrating sometimes, like, having to, like, wait. But then once his kids were asleep, he never, like, had any... It was like he could do what he wanted. Do you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, if you guys end up doing a week on, a week off with your kids, and like the week you have your kids, be with your children. And the week that you don't, I'm like, I don't even want to see you every day. I'm like, I think we should spend like a few days of that together. I'm like, because I like my space and I think you need your space.
By saying this, Nicole is suggesting that she doesn't want to get involved with the children and that her relationship with Chris exists only outside of the time he spends with them. So in both of their eyes, Bella and Celeste were obstacles to them spending time together. Chris Watts had told Nicole that he and Shanann were separating, but it does sound to me like she was hurrying things along a bit.
Sometime when he was out there, he told me, we're putting the house up for sale as soon as we get back. And I was like, whoa, that was quick. And he was like, it's her, she's ready to go. And I was like, okay. And so I left it at that, and then he got back, and I started asking him, like, what are you going to do? Because the Colorado housing market is fire, and you guys are going to sell this house, like, real fast. And I'm like, you need to start looking for a new place to live. And I'm like, where do you want to live? And I was really trying to help him out. I'm like, do you want to get a house? Do you want 3 bedrooms so you have one and each of your girls have one? I'm like, where do you want to live? And he doesn't remember probably what it's like to, like, be single or have time where it's, like, just him. Sure. And so I was just like, like, embrace that. I think it's a beautiful thing. And
Nicole's opinions would have put increasing pressure on Chris to make a decision. And we know that Shanann had sent him a book to try to heal their relationship, and that, she was afraid to go away that weekend because she just wanted to work on their relationship. So Chris would have been under pressure from both sides. Swapping Shanann for Nicole would have been a difficult decision for Chris, because he would lose his stability in the relationship. He'd lose someone that was familiar, something that he knew would be easy to continue with. A narcissist will not usually leave a victim unless they have found a replacement source of supply. When a narcissist has found another person he can get narcissistic supply from, he will then do what's called the final discard, and he will discard the victim in the most cruel, heartless way possible. There's a psychology term called self-justification, and self-justification is about how the harder the decision we have to make, the more we have to justify to ourselves that we made the right decision afterwards. And this matches something that Jackson Mackenzie says in his book Psychopath Free, which is how a narcissist will discard somebody in the most heartless way possible to convince himself that this was the right decision that was made, you know, that it was a good idea to swap that source of supply for the next source of supply. And when we look at what happened with Chris Watts, what is a more final way of making sure that you tell yourself you made the right decision than making it impossible to undo that decision? If his whole family are killed, he can't go back on it, and he's telling himself that choosing Nicole Kessinger over his family was the right thing to do. For a narcissist, it's all about control, and they don't want to be vulnerable. And if a narcissist is confused, then they're vulnerable. As I said in another video, luckily not all narcissists are sociopaths, and so they're not all going to kill their family or kill their partner when they discard them. But it can be very hard to know if somebody who is very narcissistic and has narcissistic personality disorder is also a sociopath or not. And so it's really important to watch out for the red flags of narcissism, and I'm going to be talking about those in future videos. Despite the fact that Shanann was very private about what was going on with Chris Watts to her family at the time that it was happening, and she was probably private with other people about what was happening with Chris, even her friends, before the last few weeks, because we know that the neighbour said he would go crazy with rage.
Honest with you, my wife and I were kind of wondering when she was on vacation if something happened, because I've heard them full out screaming at each other at the top of their lungs, and he gets crazy.
Does he? And that's pretty recently.
Yeah. I'm guessing that's why she went and visited people, is because she wanted to get away from the situation.
The neighbour has since said that they didn't argue more than other couples, but he's also made it clear that he wants to protect the way that Shanann Watts is seen. He doesn't want her to be seen as someone who was always having screaming arguments with somebody. Back in April, Shanann had also spoken to a divorce lawyer about custody when you're going through a divorce, and she had seemed very interested, so much so that he'd asked her if she was going through a divorce, and she'd responded just by smiling. And this makes me think that these phases of devaluation had been going on for some time before this final discard. Throwing the book in the bin was another punishing act and another way of humiliating Shanann, even though she wasn't aware that it had happened. It reminds me of when he sent the photo of the doll covered by the plastic sheet to Shanann. Even though she didn't know what it meant, he got narcissistic supply from knowing what it meant himself. When Chris Watts discarded Shanann, she was very vulnerable, pregnant with his child, emotionally and physically exhausted from what she'd been going through and what Chris Watts had put her through in the weeks leading up to her death. And she was longing for him to want to fix things with her and to love her back. I don't believe that Chris Watts would have had the courage to kill Shanann while she was awake. I think he was somebody who wasn't capable of being assertive. He either had his mask on and he was being fake and overly compliant, or he showed his rage. It was one or the other, and I'll talk more about how compliant he was later in another video. My guess is that he would have found a way to overpower her while she was still asleep. Maybe he straddled her, maybe her arms were beneath his thighs, or maybe he found some other way of overpowering her before he started strangling her and before she woke up. Shanann may have woken up when she couldn't breathe, and if she did, I think Chris Watts may have got narcissistic supply from her being awake when he was killing her. He had already had the satisfaction of telling her that he didn't want the baby and watching the way that she reacted emotionally to that, and now he was able to show her how much he despised her, that he despised her so much he was going to kill her. But why did Chris Watts hate Shanann so much that he wanted to kill her? A narcissist is extremely jealous of an empath, because an empath feels things that the narcissist is just unable to feel. An empath is naturally kind and caring and giving, and that's everything a covert narcissist wants to be seen as being like. And so every day of their lives they have to pretend that they're this person, and the whole time they're in a relationship with somebody who really is like that, and the jealousy and resentment builds up and up. But why would he hate his children so much that he would want to kill them? Bella was a very mothering, caring and kind little girl. On top of jealousy, a narcissist also feels contempt for people who show their emotions. They look down on people who show their emotions and who show their vulnerability because they weren't respected for doing that when they were little. A narcissist never does anything without a motive. So even a father who is caring for his children is doing so for a reason that's other than genuinely caring for his children. So Chris Watts, when he was looking after his children, looking after Shanann, doing anything that he did around the house, every time he would have wanted to be adored for it, to be noticed, for what he was doing and really, really appreciated. And realistically, in everyday life, that's just not going to happen, especially when it comes to children. And so for all the things that he would have done for the children, he would have built up resentment for not being adored every time he did that. And when it came to Cece, she had her own personality and would race around, as he said, not necessarily be a particularly easy child to deal with. She'd get excitable and have a lot of energy. And, dealing with that would have really frustrated Chris Watts, even if he didn't show it, because it would have been somebody who wasn't playing by his rules. And it wouldn't have suited him that he would have to pay extra attention to her without necessarily getting anything back for that. Chris Watts also talked about the way the children were starting to talk to him and how he was feeling disrespected. Narcissists are all about respect, and it doesn't matter if your child is 3 or 4 years old. If they show disrespect, that's going to make a narcissist feel an inner rage. Through his relationship with Shanann, there was a lot of competition in his mind over who the children responded to more.
I did Wolf Daddy's girl. That was, that's how it works, isn't it? It's because the first one I wasn't really good at it yet. Second one I knew what I was doing, and she bonded with me right from the start. Yeah.
The way he's talking in that interview makes it sound to me like there was a competition, that who the children warmed to was a sort of goal. It was something to be achieved, just like it was in Chris Watts' life in general. It was all about winning people over with his fake persona. And so it was the same with his children. And the way he talked about that he wasn't so good with Bella at first, he didn't really know what he's doing, but he basically mastered it with Cece. He won. He got her affection. A narcissist's most dreaded feeling is shame, and when his children appeared to pick Shanann over him by crying for her when they were with him, he would have felt shame. He would have felt criticised and like he didn't mean enough to them. he had lost and Shanann had won. So when Shanann seemed more important, the children wouldn't have mattered at all to him because they were undermining him by needing her. When Chris talks about how Bella got out of bed twice on the night that he murdered her to ask when is her mum coming home, I think there's no reason really why he'd lie about that. And we can hear Shanann's father talking about this.
And they were at the bathroom, and Bella was just like screaming like on top of her lungs like somebody was trying to steal her. And I'm like, Bella, your mother's coming. And I'm holding them, and right in the middle of an airport. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be arrested here for these two little kids screaming for their mother. And I was like right in front of the women's room, so I'm like sitting down. I wasn't about to try to pick them up and carry. And I'm like, these kids are like there to get me arrested and everything else. I'm like, you know. And when they came back to the house, they did the same thing with Chris. And now that I look at things and see what happened, why he may have done something like this. Maybe he just got tired of hearing his kids cry for mommy all the time and not him. And always, mommy disappeared, they're flying to her and not to him. And, you know, maybe he had a little bit of a resentment in him. I don't know, but kids always go to their mother.
Yeah.
You know?
And then they'll stay at school usually until about 4 o'clock, 4:30. I'll usually be home by then. I can go pick them up. I go in there, sign them out, get them in the car, drive back. They'll be screaming the whole way because they want mommy. Because that's what they do after a long day of school.
Shanann texted her friend Christina to say that she would fight for full custody of the children if Chris was leaving her. And so, you know, if Chris found out about this, that would have been, I think, too humiliating for a covert narcissist to be able to deal with. If she had found out about Nicole, she would definitely have left Chris. And both of those things Chris could not have tolerated, because it would have meant that Shanann had control of the situation, that he was the one being rejected and discarded, and that would have been something that he couldn't have coped with. And so he had to be the one to reject all of them. It takes up to 5 minutes to kill somebody through strangling them. So he had a long time to reconsider, and that was something he was never going to do. And I believe that he was getting narcissistic supply while he murdered them. I believe he was high on a feeling of power. He wore his compliant mask when he wouldn't otherwise have been in full control of the situation. So I think that when he killed them, he would have made sure that he was in complete control before allowing his rage to take over. And I think that if they were asleep, then he would have had full control when he began killing them, even though we know that Bella woke up, and in all likelihood Shanann and Celeste probably did as well. The fact that Bella was fighting to live and that he cut her inside her mouth, you know, that it seemed like it was quite a violent death, and that says a lot about him as well, that he wasn't afraid to let her die a painful death. He carried their bodies to his truck in their night dresses. The way that Shanann was buried, her backside was the highest part of her. She was buried head down so that her face was facing the ground and her backside was in the air and her legs were sort of bent underneath her. Is there a more humiliating way to be buried? So this was the ultimate feeling of power for Chris. He'd shown her that he despised her while he was killing her, and now he was shaming her after her death. And the same goes for the girls, you know, dropping them in the oil tank, just utterly degrading their bodies even after death. He was showing them now, even when they were dead, he was the one that had the power, that he had no respect for them, and that he was the one that mattered, that had the authority, that was in control, and just how little they actually mattered. It showed himself just how important he was in comparison to them. He didn't have to fake it anymore. He didn't have to pretend that he respected them. He calmly got back into his truck, contacted the estate agent and contacted the girls' school to say they wouldn't be coming in. What was on his mind at that point was protecting himself and money. And a bit later that morning, he looked up the lyrics to the Metallica song Battery. I see this as evidence that he was feeling high on narcissistic supply and that he wasn't suffering at all. He was enjoying the power. You know, this song's lyrics are all about power, about rage, and about being the one in control. And that's what Chris Watts was feeling. He'd had revenge on his family. Chris Watts was the difference between them being dead or alive. So he would have felt like God at this time. And he sent Nicole a message saying, "My family are gone," which comes across to me as very victorious.
Hey Bella, how many babies do I have in my belly?
5.
Whoa,
Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa.
that's a lot of babies. You better grow up really quickly.
It's
I need help.
tough. It's already tough.
You didn't kiss the baby?
No.
Do you kiss the baby in the morning and at night? Before
I'm
bed?
kissing it right now.
You're so funny.
Well, I'm going to kiss it in your bed, my bed, and your bed.
Want I tuck you in?
Yeah,
Okay.
I want to sleep in your bed.
Oh, I know. But you sleep in your bed like a big
Well, I
girl.
want to sleep in your bed.